don't know why I can't turn my this bit. Oh, I know I can. No.
Okay, Ruth, if you're ready.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Ruth Cadbury, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the APPG for walking and cycling, and I've got Selene Saxby, who's the other co-chair with me, and she'll be winding up the meeting. It's always good to learn from what's going on in other countries, so and of course the devolved nations or other countries, and are approaching walking and cycling and active travel in interesting and exciting ways. So very fortunate to have Patrick Harvey, MSP, who's the Minister for Active Travel in the Scottish Government, and Lee Waters, MS, who's Deputy Minister for Climate Change in the Welsh Government. They're going to be talking about their respective plans for active travel, and we'll have hopefully some time at the end. This only is a 1 hour meeting, so we'll be quite tight for time. So let me go straight ahead to Patrick and talk about what's going on in Scotland. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Ruth. And I'll not get into the controversy of whether the phrase "other countries" is premature. Maybe one day, but for the moment, let's say other jurisdictions or other nations and parts of the UK. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you for a little while and to be part of your discussion. I'm really happy to be able to do that, and I'm happier still to be able to report that I'm doing this just 2 days after a very successful Pedal on Parliament event in Edinburgh, where hundreds of cyclists, walkers and wheelers of all shapes, sizes and descriptions descended on the Scottish Parliament to demonstrate the very keen appetite there is for making progress on the agenda that the Scottish Government is committed to. I'd like to highlight some themes around choice, delivery and leadership in these remarks. As we're all very, very aware, over the last couple of years, the painful and distressing experience that we've all come through with the pandemic has had some upsides. It had the opportunity and the motivation for many, many more people to choose to walk, wheel and cycle, and to change the way we get around and to change the way we use our communities, our built environment, our urban environment in particular. And it's allowed many people to discover new ways to see their neighbourhood, interact with people around them. But the political choices that have been made over decades before that don't make it easy for people to make those choices. Decisions that have been made in past decades about the location of shops and public services, the layout of streets, design of our roads, footways, junctions, and just the sheer volume of traffic that we have generated and allowed to be generated, and the car-centered culture that we've allowed to develop. All of these things conspire to make the choice to walk, wheel or cycle quite often feel like a choice in the face of adversity, when it should be the first natural choice for many, many more people. For everybody who has told me how much they've relished that freedom to walk, wheel and cycle more, somebody else has told me that they feel apprehensive or unsafe about doing so. And I can relate to that. I was a regular cyclist when I was a student in Manchester, and at the time my route was Europe's busiest bus route. Europe's busiest bus route. That was my daily commute. And after moving back to Glasgow, even having had that experience, I looked around my home city and I thought, I'm not going to cycle in this. It didn't feel safe. And I'm really glad that eventually I got over that and I went back on the bike, but it took me a long time to get to that point. My home city didn't feel safe. And there are also people that I've met in this new job within government, when I've been trying to take this conversation forward, people who tell me that they do need their car for certain trips, but they would very happily leave it behind a lot of the time in favour of active travel or public transport for some or even most of their travel. So active travel choices are not simple binary choices. So I believe that my job and our job is to make the political choices and the personal choices come together and support one another. So I'm really pleased to be now overseeing the biggest ever budget for active travel in Scotland's history. We'd already increased it last year, and we've now increased it again to 150 million in this new financial year. And that's a big step on the way to committing 320 million, or 10% of Scotland's transport budget, to walking, wheeling, cycling by the year 24-25. That's a level of investment that will equate to £58 per person in Scotland. So in 2 years' time, our commitment will outstrip the per capita spend of the Netherlands. Now, admittedly, our Dutch friends have been at it for quite a bit longer, and that illustrates how important sustained investment over a long period of time is, and how investment in active travel needs to be part of a much bigger picture about how we plan and design our streets, towns, and cities. And it's about more than just money as well. The levels of walking, wheeling, and cycling that other European countries often have achieved didn't happen just by allocating budgets. It's about how we spend and how we make decisions. So over this year, I've set in motion a full review of how we deliver this growing programme. Our delivery model for active travel on the scale of the budgets that are coming can't be the same as the delivery model we used when it was a few tens of millions of pounds a year. So I want to make sure that our delivery model makes the most of that new scale of investment that's being put in. And I want to maximise the role of active travel in the wider transition to a sustainable transport system, which is going to have to involve fewer unnecessary journeys and a reduced use of road space for private car travel. We have a commitment to achieve a 20% reduction in car kilometres in Scotland by the year 2030. And some of the choices that are going to be required to meet that target will be politically challenging, but we're committed to seeing that through. This year, we're sustaining our headline Places for Everyone programme that's run by Sustrans, and we're more than doubling our investment in the National Cycle Network. And those programmes will deliver the connected network that's so important, so that we can talk just as meaningfully about an active travel and path and cycleway network as we do about a road or rail network. Now, a lot of that delivery will happen in partnership with local authorities, and that's why we're also increasing the capital funding programme for walking and safer routes that goes directly to our councils, from 24 million to 35 million pounds. And that means over a period of 4 years, direct local authority funding will have increased fourfold. I want to pick out a few strands of that investment programme. The first is a new Paths Fund managed by Paths for All. That's a £1.5 million fund for small local projects to make improvements in existing path infrastructure and make connections where there are gaps in local path networks. And a lot of that will be in rural areas. So this is to demonstrate that transformation isn't just about big city or town centre changes. It's as much about connecting remote communities and making very local neighbourhoods better places to live in, move around, and spend time in. The second aspect of the programme is around inclusive active travel. Walking, wheeling, and cycling should be choices for the maximum number of people. And that can be challenging, whether that's access to adaptive bikes, access to storage, and also making sure that we have street design guidance that makes sure that active travel is a choice for everyone and that it properly reflects the different experiences that people have of our built environment. It's important that we continue to support e-bikes as part of that. And we've got an e-bike grant fund that includes support for those non-standard and adapted bikes. And we'll also continue to fund a cycle repair scheme with £50 per repair and £100 for adapted bikes, making sure that we address some of the problems in the supply chain, because lots of people who want bikes find at the moment it takes a long time to get them. And of course, over the course of this year, we're also piloting the provision of free bikes for children of school age who can't afford them. We've already committed £2.5 million to fund 10 pilot projects that are underway, which will benefit up to 3,000 children. And the third arm of delivery that I wanted to pick out in these opening remarks is the wider work that we're doing with children and young people. In the last year, we've invested £1.3 million in bikeability training for schools in 31 local authorities, and that supports almost half of schools to deliver on-road training. And next year, we'll more than double our grant funding to Living Streets Scotland to over £500,000 for programmes including Walk Once a Week, involving over 100,000 primary school children and their families in many local authority areas, most local authority areas in Scotland, to encourage them to walk to school. I think we all know just how passionately young people care about the climate crisis, the future of our world. They are challenging us to respond to that passion. So our job is to give them the choices over sustainable travel that can rise to that challenge. And it's the full package of measures and actions that we take that will make the difference, not just one or two seen in isolation. Supporting active travel choices and delivering those projects also comes down to leadership, and that means at every level, central government, local government, and at community level. But too often, sadly, that support at both national and local levels can disappear when it comes to specific projects on the ground. People saying they support active travel, signing up to targets, but then perhaps too often opportunistically opposing individual measures, whether that's around bike lanes, parking space, or the other changes that need to happen. It's not enough to support active travel in principle and then stand in the way of project after project actually happening. Too often, what we see is delay, dilution, and disruption of projects. And the kind of language of people who complain about an imaginary war on motorists. So clear and consistent leadership is really important to make sure that people can choose to walk, wheel, and cycle more often. We, as politicians, also have to choose. Choices about who gets priority for finite road space, choices about speed versus safety, choices about changing our car culture and achieving that sustained reduction in traffic levels, choices about what we want our future places and communities to look and feel like. So these are the themes that I've tried to pick out: choice, both political and personal level, delivery, and leadership. I want Scotland to be a nation where walking, wheeling, and cycling are the first natural choice, an easy choice for many, many more people to make. I think we can deliver the scale of transformation that many of our neighbours in Europe have already achieved with sustained investment and that commitment to a delivery model that works and local leadership and national leadership working together. And if we do that, we'll transform our towns, cities, and communities swiftly, comprehensively, and critically, we'll do that inclusively. So that's an overview of the approach we're taking in Scotland. I really look forward to the rest of the speakers and to the discussion. Thanks very much.
Thanks, thanks ever so much, Patrick. That was, that's inspiring and reflects a lot of the challenges mayors and councils have had in the UK. But thank you for that, and no doubt we'll have some more specific questions for you later. So I now want to move on to Lee Waters, who has reminded me, because we both used to work for Sustrans, although me not for very long. But Lee Waters is Deputy Minister for Climate Change in the Welsh Government. So over to you, Lee.
Thanks, Ruth, and thanks for holding tonight's discussion. I think it's really useful for us to compare and contrast with each other and just be honest with each other about the bits that are working and the bits remain to be challenging. And that's the whole point of devolution, is we try, experiment, we share, we learn, we scale. So I just thought I'd run through the Welsh approach and then give you some honest reflections on where we're falling short, and then hopefully hear a bit more about what is going on elsewhere. Good to hear, Patrick. I've long been an admirer of some of the things Scotland is doing in this area. I think some of their targets are very stretching. I think their target on mileage is, I'm not sure if it's achievable, Patrick, but good on you for trying. And sometimes targets should stretch us beyond our reach. We've got our own set of targets, which are which is 10% reduction in mileage, which I'm not sure how we're going to achieve that, to be honest. 20, I thought was a bit too bold. But just very briefly about me. So as Ruth mentioned, I used to be somebody who worked in active travel. I was a Welsh director of Sustrans for 5 years. Went off to work in think tankery and then stood for election. And now I'm have ministerial responsibility for active travel within a department which is deliberately broad. So after last year's elections, Mark Drakeford, the First Minister, created a Ministry for Climate Change. 2 ministers, covers transport, planning, housing, energy, environment, regeneration, digital, something else, I think. Lots of things anyway, which is a bit exhausting. But the upside of it is to try and get synergies across the piece, because obviously planning impacts our transport as much as anything else. So we're only a year in, and we've taken some initial bold strokes. So, for example, we've frozen all road building projects. Definitely something I hope Scotland can take from us. I'm sure Patrick would need any convincing on that one. Not without its difficulties or controversies. So we've frozen them. We've set up an independent panel to look at it, led by Lynn Sloman, who's I think currently Deputy Chair of TfL, and a really strong group of vets on transport and climate change. The expectation that lots of them will get cancelled, not all of them, but lots of them, and we will shift spending to public transport and to maintaining the roads we currently have. But just as importantly, set a set of metrics for when road building is the right solution to a transport problem in future, because there will be times when road building is the right thing to do, but it won't be the default answer, which for too long it has been. So that's currently in train. We also have we cancelled the M4 motorway £2 billion project a couple of years back, and set up after that, commissioned by Lord Burns, former Treasury Permanent Secretary, who set out instead an alternative public transport set of measures for Newport and Cardiff, and that is now in its delivery phase, and crucially set up a delivery unit between the local authority, Transport for Wales, and the Welsh Government just to look at particularly the commuting corridors and what alternative package of measures could be put in place, and to then create a pipeline of schemes to deliver them. So that's showing promise, and we've just done something similar for North Wales. So we had the Union Connectivity Review, the Sir Peter Hendy Review, which we didn't ask for, but we got anyway. And one of the things it came up with was a recommendation for looking at the A55 across North Wales, the road, to which we've said, fine, we'll do that, but we also actually want to look at everything else. We'll particularly want to look at rural transport. So not just the fast road corridor, but the whole hinterland, and how we develop sustainable transport interventions for that. So that's now starting. Burns again back on board for that, and that will also look at active travel and set out crucially, and this is the key bit for me, is the delivery mechanisms for making that meaningful after the event. So there's that going on. We've also got a move to make 20 mile an hour default speed limit from next year in all residential areas. Big job of work going on now, systematizing that. How do we draw up local maps? How do we set out an exceptions process? That's a huge piece of work, big public engagement exercise needed around that. And we're also trying to get powers to give local authorities the power to fine pavement parking. So quite a reform agenda, as well as I say, our overall modal shift targets. For the first time in our transport strategy, we now have a target of 45% of journeys by sustainable means by 2040, and a formal modal shift target in a transport policy. Never happened before. But active travel specifically, we are taking what I think is a systemic approach. So when I was at Sustrans, I led a cross-party campaign to create an Active Travel Act, which we passed in 2013. So there's now a law which says that all highway authorities have to come up with a network of routes and refresh that every 3 years, and all funding needs to go towards implementing that network of routes. Now, I think there are things to learn from that. Some bits have gone well, some bits are still a struggle. Other parts of the country are taking a different approach, so compare and contrast. So I think where ours work quite well, we've done an audit of all existing infrastructure, and it is heavily an infrastructure-based approach. I guess that's one of its main shortcomings. It's hard measures, not soft measures. So we've done an existing network assessment. We've then, since 2017, started doing a future network assessment. So every 3 years, every local authority has to consult with their local people and ask them, where do you think the future routes should be? They then have to publish a active travel network map, which then they bid against. So funding will only be awarded if it adds to the network, and the network has to comply with best practice design standards. So Phil Jones in 2014 published his design guidance, just revised it last year. So the idea is you're only building good stuff that connects and over time starts creating a coherent network, so you have end-to-end journeys from where people live to where they want to go. We've increased spending too. When I was elected in 2016, I think we were spending around £5 million a year. This year we're spending 60 million. Next year we're spending 80 million. So money helps, but it's not just about money, because one of the real challenges we have is the capacity and capability of local authorities to deliver this well. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Just a little bit other aspects of our approach. We also give every local authority a core allocation of money. So they all get at least, we've got 22 local authorities in Wales, too many. Each has got £500,000 to start developing a pipeline of future schemes, which they can get going in order to bid on in future years. But they can also use that for continuous improvement measures. So for example, they can resurface existing paths. We've been really encouraging them to take down access barriers, which are antisocial and ineffective and discriminate against people with disabilities in particular. So that's been quite effective where local authorities have chosen to do that. And I guess that's the Achilles heel, this is all up to the appetite of local authorities. And where local authorities are good and want to do it, they do it. And where they're not, we don't really have many levers in this approach to work against them. And I think that is a weakness. So we have the core allocation of everyone for 500,000, and the rest of the money is competitive. And I've been quite clear that I want to award ambition. I'm not in the business of being a politician that just gives a little bit to everybody, just to keep them all encouraged and keep the noise down. Where we have authorities who are ambitious, who are prepared to reallocate low road space, we will fund them. So Cardiff, for example, has had significant investment from the Welsh Government over a number of years because they've shown the cojones to do stuff, frankly. They are taking major routes in the middle of the city centre away from cars to creating segregated cycle corridors, and we are prepared to support them to do it. And that is showing dividends, and it's important, just as they've done in Scotland, where the major cities are able to be seen as exemplars, that then encourages and inspires some of the laggards in the other countries to get their act together. We've also then finally, the other last bit of the jigsaw really is we've got a sort of a strategic central role for our equivalent of TfLs, which is TFW, Transport for Wales, and they administer the grants, and they also make sure that the schemes are compliant with the design guidance, and also provide some source of central expertise for local authorities to draw upon. So that's kind of the ecosystem we've developed. As I say, it's attempting to take a systemic, strategic approach to put active travel infrastructure on the same level footing statutory as highways. The local authorities, highways authorities have a statutory requirement to maintain and develop a road network. They now in Wales have the same duty to develop a network for active travel. And that, I think, that is useful in making sure there is a baseline and there is a pressure to add to it. And when you do it in a strategic, systemic, linked up way. So that's the plus side. And just for the last couple of minutes, the limitations of that. As I say, it's only as good as a local authority is prepared to be. So that I won't name names because we are in local government campaigning period, and I wouldn't want to cause anybody any difficulties. So there are some local authorities who really don't give a monkeys, and the fact we're offering them money and they don't want to bid for it means nothing gets done. So inevitably in change, you're not going to get even application of change. Innovation is uneven and diffusion is difficult. So as I say, Cardiff is really cracking on. Others are less consistent. There is one of the reasons for that is political will. As Patrick rightly identified, leadership is critical. But even when there is a will, sometimes there just isn't the capability and capacity in local authorities. And we have too many local authorities. They just haven't got the bodies. And some of the bodies they got, frankly, are in the arc. They're wedded to an orthodox approach to transport, which lets down their communities, in my view. So trying to address that is challenging. We have said we want them to work regionally. I want them to pool capacity and capability. Reluctance to do that. So we're looking at, can we create that at a national level? So it can be drawn upon, just as Active Travel England is looking to do, which I think is probably a good model. So that's something we're still feeling our way through, to be honest. The others of challenges, I say, is consistent political leadership, particularly at a very local level, at a ward level. You can have the best policies, but if the ward member is kicking up against losing car parking spaces, the whole thing can grind to a halt. So how do you get consistent buy-in to that? And this is one of my frustrations about the pandemic, was that we were hoping, as part of our mapping process through the Act, say local authorities have to consult every 3 years, and we were trying to put a real big push on getting them to consult properly with non-typical users and trying unorthodox approaches at consultation rather than the your council website open for 28 days or whatever it is. But because of pandemic, couldn't meet. But I'm very attracted to the planning for real model. I think that can really work to get people into a room and look at their community and understand where the routes are and where they're not. We also did manage, though, with a good deal of success, I would say, to use an online method. We used the Commonplace platform, which we paid for all local authorities to have access to do a heat mapping exercise, where would you want routes? And that was excellent and has worked well. And we've had lots of data for local authorities of where local people think the gaps are, which they then need to feed into their planning process. So genuine engagement with non-traditional users remains a challenge. Our problem is soft measures. We don't have the revenue funding available. We have capital funding, we don't have revenue, and nor do we have as much money as Patrick has, because the Barnett formula works better for him than it does for us, to make a little political point there. And also, it's all about priorities as well, isn't it? We haven't hitherto invested enough in it. And it's hard to find revenue for us. That treasury split is a real barrier, I think, with capital revenue. Inclusive design, I think, is an ongoing challenge. Engagement with disabilities communities in particular, and what good design looks like. Our design guidance does cover it, but it's an area of ongoing development, I think you will be only honest to say. So those are, I think, some honest reflection of some of the things we struggle with, and we've got a long way to go. I do think e-bikes really offer an opportunity for a change of mindset, to get new people onto bikes in particular. Then shared space considerations about pedestrians, and we need to make sure good design is there to make sure that one doesn't affect the other. What we've decided to do is not a voucher scheme for people to buy e-bikes, but to target it at lower income communities, because I do think it has a particular advantage for people who are struggling with the cost of owning and running a car or who don't have any access to transport. So we're piloting in 4 deprived communities, and then we've deliberately picked areas with lots of hills, to try and see if this could, shift modal use. We're also trying a couple of e-cargo pilots. We've got one pilot for adapted bikes for disabilities and one in a very rural community. So we'll be monitoring them closely. So I think that's me done for my allocated time. So I think we've come a long way in a short period, but climate change means we can't hang around. And we really do need now to have the political will to follow through. So that roads review I talked about, the cancelling of road schemes, the freeing up of money needs to go seriously and at pace into active travel. But we've got to have the skills and the ability of people and the leadership locally to make that meaningful. And that is work in progress.
Lee, thank you. And also thank you for being prepared to be honest on the challenges, as well as the good news stories. And I think that's always important on this issue of how we get more people walking and cycling, and what government, local and national, can do to achieve that. And we've got to remember that the transformation in the Netherlands started in one city in Utrecht and spread out, and we seem to forget, but I'm sure there was local opposition among the car lobby and also politicians who were wedded to the car back then. So it's a sticky move in hopefully in the long run in the right direction. But well done, Lee, because you've come in just under time. Could I go back to Patrick, and could you possibly, as Lee did, pick up on the issues around relationships with local authorities, the challenges, and or are they the same kind of challenges? But also, have you got any other tricks up your sleeve that have been successful in bringing round local authorities, local political leaders, Patrick?
Thanks. I mean, I tried to allude to that, and Lee was much more refreshingly blunt about it. I think you used the phrase "some local authorities don't give a monkeys." I think that's a picture that we recognise here in Scotland, and perhaps it tends to be the more urban councils, certainly Glasgow and Edinburgh, are more ambitious at the moment in terms of transforming transport for active travel. Some of the more rural local authorities that are interested in this, historically, it's been seen as recreation rather than transport policy. And that might change the nature of the kind of projects that they've been looking to progress, or that they already have in place. But it also, there's no doubt at all that Lee is right, and we recognise this in Scotland. There are some local authorities that aren't even on square one yet. As for how we achieve that kind of change, I mentioned the Pedal on Parliament event that happened on Saturday, partly because it is community leadership that I think can be really more powerful on this. As a minister, I've got a big and a growing budget that I can use as something that is hopefully attractive to local authorities to get a piece of the action, if you like. But those that aren't interested, I don't want them just to deliver something perfunctory because there's money available. I don't want them to deliver something half-hearted or poorly designed just because there's money available. And I also don't want to miss out on the opportunity to achieve modal shift. And some of that, frankly, will be in the urban centres, where we can achieve the maximum shift away from more polluting transport modes. So it is a very live discussion, and I'm not going to pretend that we have a magic solution to it. My feeling is that giving power to local community level, so that communities who want to see change are able to act as the pressure on their local councils from one angle, while the Scottish Government is also putting pressure and offering opportunities from the other angle, that may be helpful. Clearly, we've got a local election at the moment, and there are many people out campaigning and putting pressure on their candidates from all political parties to say, what are you going to deliver and how are you going to do it? But sadly, we know that the kind of Jeremy Clarkson wannabes are out there as well, saying, are you going to protect my parking spaces? Are you going to, make sure that we can drive wherever we want? Just really minor things like the workplace parking levy, which is already an option for councils in England and is already in use in at least one city, and I think a couple of others are looking at it. We've just legislated for it, and even just passing the legislation to allow councils to consider this has been leapt upon by other political parties as though it's some sort of war on motorists. So we need to challenge that kind of contradictory thinking at every level, including amongst political parties. But yeah, the delivery transformation program that I mentioned in my opening remarks about how we're going to deliver on a bigger scale, I would imagine that one element of that will be that we will take national decision making on certain types of infrastructure, like active freeways or what have you, which won't necessarily be seen as local authority decision making. Last thing, I know I've spoken for a long time on this question, but I had a meeting with Nicola Mallon, my opposite number from the Northern Ireland administration, when she was over for COP in Glasgow, and the contrast that we had. She has responsibility for decision making on specific projects. That's not done at local government level, local council level. So she didn't have the big budget, but she had the ability to draw policy together and make specific decisions. Whereas I've got the big budget and I have to rely on local councils to have the appetite and the will to deliver it properly. And I think at some level, we both felt that the grass was greener on the other side. So maybe there's no single perfect approach to this, but we need all elements to be working in a coherent way.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm going to sort of slightly translate Jamie Smith's question about active and sustainable travel for rural areas. How do you both get funding into rural areas where I would imagine a lot of the interest, and you've both alluded to, the big cities, Cardiff and Glasgow and Edinburgh, who are, probably moving ahead at pace and probably saying, can we have more money? Can we have more powers? And, recognising that in rural communities, both active travel is a tourism generator. There's a lot of people who cycle as part of their holidays, but don't cycle day to day. But also, particularly for some country towns and some rural communities, actually cycling could be a straightforward way to get around as it is in cities. But there's less sort of awareness of the opportunities, and also just the environment for walking in town and village centres is often more hostile than ever. So do either of you have any good experiences, particularly for the non-leisure cycling? But you may have something that links leisure cycling and walking, sorry, apologies, with sort of, you can show some economic benefits.
So first of all, I'd say this is not easy. This is going against 70 years of transport orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. So I think that we should acknowledge that at every point. Now, particularly in a country like Wales, which is lots of rural areas, for those people who can't find it hard to imagine what change looks like, will immediately seize on the barriers, and they'll say it's too difficult in rural areas. It doesn't apply. There's an urban agenda, to which I say bollocks. Frankly, this is absolutely a rural agenda, because you look at rural Switzerland or rural Sweden or rural Germany, it's mainstream. And why is it mainstream? Because they've chosen to prioritize it over many years. So this is about choices. Now, again, the second thing I say to rural areas is, let's start with your towns. Okay, so deep rural, this is clearly not the first priority for investment, but all rural areas have towns, and most of the journeys made in those towns are within the towns. They're short local journeys. So let's focus on them. And one of the exercises we're going to be doing is mapping sort of the nearby villages to those towns and creating sort of corridors to them. So that is hard. Back to the skills and capacity, often local authorities don't have the bodies, and the bodies they have don't have the imagination very often to think like this. So we've got a known set of challenges there. The second set of issues, I think, are around the trunk roads. So the Welsh Government are the trunk roads agencies, and there's traditionally been an approach within the trunk roads, because a bunch of guys are used to looking after roads. If you have to build a cycle lane, damn you, we'll just put it next to the road, which may be easier, but is often not the most attractive. So trying to attract modal shift may not be the best way to do. So how do we challenge the traditional way of thinking in the trunk roads community to look at routes which may be away from the alignment of main roads, which are then more difficult and more time consuming to deliver, because there's multiple land ownership, there's all sorts of challenges. So that requires a longer time frame, it requires planning, and it requires a lot of grief, frankly, which they may not be prepared to take part in. So that's a challenge, and that's something we're currently looking at. We're thinking of maybe creating some kind of crack hit squad of a team of people who we can send into a trunk road local authority area and do a concentrated piece of work to show that change is possible. And to be fair, Sustrans have been doing this sort of thing for years. But here, my final point, this is where I think we do need to make the challenge on leisure versus utility cycling, because lots of local authorities, you're right, Ruth, their comfort zone is, well, if we've got to go along with the cycling stuff, we'll just make it leisure because that's less threatening. And I'm being quite firm on that. We are not funding leisure routes. Now, obviously, lots of routes have multiple purposes, and it's sometimes an arbitrary distinction to say this is a leisure route, not an urban route. But things that are purely tourist leisure routes, they're important, but in climate change terms, they are not a priority. We've got to be focused on the modal shift, and we've got to be urgent about it. So there's quite a bit of pushback from rural authorities on that, and some of them have gone round their head and applied for levelling up funding to do it, regardless of what we want. So there's a divide and rule game going on here with UK government funding that we need to be mindful of. So that's so back to as I was saying earlier, I do think e-bikes change for rural areas in particular, but then it does need to have the safe infrastructure.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much. So Patrick, would you like to add more about rural cycling and walking, or away from the big cities?
I mean, just briefly, I think Lee's obviously right about e-bikes in particular for areas where the terrain or the distances are more favoured by that, and I think bike hire schemes as well in towns could be really helpful, not just in giving people access, whether they're visitors or residents, giving people access to a bike that meets their needs locally, but also just the visibility and making sure that people are conscious that this is an option, putting it right in front of them as an option. I just wanted to say one additional point, which is about the cost of living crisis. Part of my job is active travel. Another part of my job is the zero carbon buildings agenda, energy efficiency, zero emission heating systems. And on both, we get some of a slightly similar or connected pushback from rural areas, whether on transport, it's people here rely on their cars, you can't get about without a car, or it's our communities have harder to treat building stock or more properties off the gas grid and so on, that some of the same challenges. I think the fact that we're now, all of us across the political spectrum, trying in our different ways to address the cost of living crisis, I think seeing it in those terms actually says rural communities should be the priority here, because these are places where people are paying even more for their heat and for their transport costs than folk in other parts of the community. People not just paying more, but feeling that they have less choice. So actually, this is a context in which we should say there's an even greater sense of urgency, even greater need to address the additional costs that people are paying for the way they get about and how much they have to get about, to make sure that people see active travel as the most friendly to your wallet, as well as the most friendly to your health and most friendly to the climate mode of travel. So there's a potential, I think, to change that conversation in the context of the current economic climate.
Thank you. Thanks, Patrick. Dave stroke Andy Holiday has asked a number of quite specific questions about taking facilities for bikes on buses and trams, and then specific questions for Lee that Lee is answering. Yeah, sorry, Lee has answers. So I'm clicking between the two sets of questions and answers. On bike hire and scooter hire schemes, you're rolling. I can see that they're in Glasgow and Cardiff. How easy is it to roll out in other places, and what are the challenges around hire bike schemes? Is there anything in UK legislation? Obviously I don't know everything about what's UK and what's devolved powers. Do you see any challenges there?
There's no power issue, is there, Patrick? It's a funding issue, really.
Funding.
Yeah, and the experience from the continent has been that you need to start off with sufficient scale. If you're going to persuade someone to leave a car behind and rely on the public hire scheme, you need to have confidence that there are stations near where they want to start from and where they want to go to, and when they get there, there'll be a bike for them and the bike will work. And that's the challenge we've had. So you need to start off with lots and lots of bikes, which involves lots and lots of subsidy, which is revenue funding, which we find hard to do. So we started off with a modest number of bikes, which has been successful. It's definitely generated enthusiasm. It's taken a little while to bed in, but once it's bedded in and people get used to it, they like it. But then there's the issue of reliability, because we've been really beset by vandalism. So you'll have a station on your app showing there are bikes there, you get there and the bikes aren't working. So that only once or twice somebody has to do that and they give up on the scheme. So that has been the big challenge we found in Cardiff. We're sticking with it and we've relaunched it, but it's not a panacea, I would say. Yeah,
I mean, I agree that powers aren't necessarily the issue. Personally, I think there's a question about the delivery model. Seeing this kind of scheme delivered as it is in Glasgow by an organisation which is rooted in the community, which is a not-for-profit social enterprise, staffed by people who really care passionately about this, has led to success. In Edinburgh, you had a big private sector operator that took it on, and for whatever the context of that, I don't think that was the model that should have been pursued. The one thing that is about powers, though, is about the range of vehicles that might be available. I think we're all of us yet to have a proper conversation about what is the space for e-scooters, what is the space for different types of electric vehicles, either on our roads or on our footways and cycle lanes. How is that going to continue to develop? And hire schemes could be really good at giving people the first access, their first attempt to try out some of these wider range of vehicles, but we haven't yet got a clear sense of how we want to regulate the use of those different types of vehicles in different kinds of space. I think there's more appetite for that in the public already than there is yet willingness for any of our governments to properly come up with a set of answers about how we want to see that develop.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing, I've seen one other new question come in, but I'm not seeing a rush of general schemes. Very useful comments from Dave Andy Holiday. So I'm going to bow out with one question for you each to answer. A wider question is, in the UK context, what as we as UK parliamentarians should we be doing or be aware of in order to help get more people walking and cycling in your two jurisdictions, and hopefully in the UK as a whole? But because I say not all of us, those of us who are English MPs, not all of us understand where the opportunities and the distinctions lie. So as I can see Patrick on the screen, go to Patrick first, and then Lee, and then I think I'll ask Selene to wrap up the whole session. So which of you wants to go first, Patrick? Or?
I mean, I think there's a sort of general almost a sort of soft power role that we all as politicians have in this, about how is it we talk about transport. For a long time, transport is seen as very a bit like economic growth, as though more of everything is always a good thing. The idea that increasing traffic volumes, increasing demand for transport was never seen as a problem in its own right. I think very clearly we need to get to the point where, a little bit like waste management, a little bit like domestic energy use, we talk about demand reduction. Nobody would have a conversation about waste management without trying to reduce volumes of waste nowadays. No one would talk about energy issues without recognizing that reducing improving energy performance, reducing energy waste, it has to be part of the picture. Transport for a long time has been seen as one of those kind of more of policies, and it's inevitable, because there's always a difficulty in politics of trying to offer people an alternative to what they're used to. It's always much easier to offer people more of the same. I'll build you another road, just like like health or education. You want to provide more of the service. Transport has been a more of kind of policy as well. And we need to get it back into a space where we talk about demand reduction. We talk about trying to offer people a different way of meeting their needs than just more of the same, or building another road or cutting people's fuel prices. We need to be using that kind of soft power to move away from this sort of. I mean, even now we still get this kind of language around war on motorists thrown around glibly as though it's a real thing, and it's a fiction. So there's a question about, using our influence, using our voice as a political level to try and achieve that cultural change and a change of expectations in what transport policy is and what it's for. I think there's obviously a personal leadership issue as well. I mean, I was only in post for a couple of months before the first FOI requests came in about how many times I've used a government car. And I only wish I'd seen their little faces drop when they saw the answer coming back saying none. And my private office have been getting used to getting around to visits with me by bike. There's a political leadership thing as well of showing by doing. A huge amount of the way that we move about is still almost like a status symbol attachment to it, as though you're more important because you're moving around in a bigger metal box that costs somebody more money to use, and that needs to be thrown out. So this is, I know this is probably a rather vague and non-specific answer, but I think there is really something about soft power and setting the cultural expectations. What is transport policy for? That we need to get to grips with. And some of what Lee was talking about around changing roads policy is a big part of that, and Scotland's doing that as well. We have two major road projects, one of which was too late when the last year's political cooperation agreement was being negotiated, too late to change. The other, though, is being subjected to new climate tests and almost certainly won't go ahead in the way that it was originally proposed, and it'll just be the elements that relate to safety that go ahead. But yeah, there needs to be a shift in our spend. There needs to be a shift in the policies that we're delivering. But more than that, there needs to be a shift in cultural expectations, because if there isn't that, then politicians will continue to cater for, as I said earlier, the Jeremy Clarksons of the world, as though that's in the least bit sustainable. We know that it isn't.
Okay, thanks ever so much, Patrick. And so we've got a little bit of time for Selene to close the meeting. Lee, is there anything you would like to say in terms of my question or more general?
Yes, so to answer your question, Ruth, I think the challenges we face in different parts of the UK are very similar. In fact, I think they're the same challenges, and what's different is the approach we're taking. And I think we should see the positive of that, so long as we share and learn. I think because it's only positive if we are informed by it. Otherwise, it's just pointless, really. So I think this group, I think, has a role in bringing us all together, in sharing that. So if you could have a continued interest in doing that, I think that would be a good thing for us all. Because there's definitely things that we can learn from both the English and the Scottish approach, and vice versa, no doubt. I think ultimately people will do what the easy thing to do is. And for 70 years we've made it easy to jump in a car, and we made it difficult to get on the bus or get on the bike. And unless we reverse that, we're not going to achieve our climate change targets. As simple as that. Recycling in Wales. Wales had the worst recycling rates in the world 10 years ago. Now we've got the third best in the world. And how have we done that? We've made it easy. We've invested in local authorities to give them the capital equipment. We've put fines on them if they hadn't hit targets. And at a consumer level, we've normalized it. And that's the other key thing. We're not going to make it easy, we're going to make it normal. So there's a big role, I think, in social marketing and nudge approaches here in changing perceptions of what is normal. Because for too long, big cycling has been seen as an eccentric act. You have to be a slightly odd person to get on a bike. And I think one of the good things we're now seeing in London, this is now mainstream, and that's beginning to happen in Cardiff as well. And I think we'll see ripples of this development. So normalizing and making it easy, taking away the points of pain, I think are crucial. And that's why I think we need to take a systemic and a strategic approach. Because you need to think about road building and car use. We've hardwired that into the system. It is now easy. If you're going to build a road, for example, versus, as I mentioned earlier, a cycle path in a rural area, it is easy to build a road because all the legislative toolkit pieces are in one place. And we spent years making this the transport engineering orthodoxy, and it is easy there to do. Or the cost benefit formulas all advantage it, and disadvantage the alternative. The design manual for roads and bridges all makes it easy, and the alternative is grief and expensive and difficult. And we've got to change that. We've got to go root and branch systemically through all the different pain points and change them and challenge them. And that's what we're starting to do in Wales. I would say just two threats, I think, on the horizon. So on Patrick's point of
very briefly, because
on personal leadership, I think electric cars are a problem. I've had an electric car since last September. I lease it, I pay £370 a month for it, and I've hardly been on my bike since, because it's there and I bloody paid for the thing. And it's really easy to drive and it's lovely. So that's a problem, I think. And we need to think very hard about, the switch to electric cars could well see modal shift moving in the wrong direction. And I think automated cars in particular could see that. You could see a decrease in active travel if we're not careful. So we shouldn't be complacent that this is obvious and easy to us, and therefore it's going to follow. We've got to sort out the current system and take away the pain points, and we've got to make sure that what comes next also advantages active travel.
Lovely. Thanks ever so much, Lee and Patrick, and over to Selene.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you for chairing, and thank you to Patrick and Lee for this afternoon. It was lovely to actually hear something about rural transport for once, actually, as someone from a rural constituency. It is a particular passion of mine to get people in the countryside and in the hilly places to be able to participate in some form of active travel. So obviously Ruth's a London MP, I'm North Devon. So thank you both for sharing your wisdom and insight this afternoon. It's very much appreciated. I have nothing more to say other than to advertise the upcoming events. On the 23rd of May at 4:30, we have the Transport Minister, Baroness Beer, who's speaking with us on road safety and active travel in association with the APPG on transport safety. And on the 17th of June, it's time to do one of those terribly eccentric things and get on your bicycle for the parliamentary bike ride. Staff are also welcome, as well as MPs, Lords, and almost anyone else that's passing by, because we will be wearing helmets. So very much hope that you will be getting on your bike for that one. Ruth's unmuted herself, so I'm not sure if she will.
No, it's the I thought you said the 17th of June. It's the 7th of June.
7th. Apologies, I seem to be having microphone issues this afternoon. Connectivity is something else we need to sort out in North Devon. But thank you everyone for taking part, particularly to Patrick and Lee for your time and insight, and to Adam for all his hard work in the background. Thank you for everyone listening, and see you all again next time.